This is the greatest danger of the gray zone tactics. Each individual action may not appear to trigger an international crisis. With each increase in pressure, we may judge that it still does not constitute war.
This test launch was a routine military training activity conducted by the Chinese armed forces and was not directed at any specific country or target.
Taiwan sounds the alarm after Xi Jinping tests a nuclear-capable missile, raising fears of Beijing's next dangerous move across the strait. Is Taipei being left to face China alone as Trump reignites the Iran conflict and America's allies begin questioning Washington's priorities? Are these merely pressure tactics, or is China quietly conducting the final rehearsals before a Taiwan invasion while keeping the entire Pacific on edge? Tensions between China and Taiwan are escalating after Beijing's latest nuclear upgrade heightened security concerns across the region. Taiwan is warning global powers that China's recent military actions could fundamentally change the status quo in the Indo-Pacific. Taipei accused Beijing of deliberately carrying out pressure tactics in the Taiwan Strait to intimidate the self-governed island. A senior Taiwan official on July 8 claimed China is deliberately pushing the limits with the United States and other allied nations. However, China, on July 7, insisted its Pacific missile launch was nothing more than a routine military training exercise.
If an authoritarian country does not change the status quo through a one-off military action, but instead advances a little bit each day, increasing Coast Guard activity today, expanding military exercises tomorrow, conducting so-called law enforcement inspections of merchant vessels the day after, and then, in the next step, interfering with our undersea cables, the international shipping order or information systems, then we have to ask from which day can we say that the status quo has already been changed. This is the greatest danger of the gray zone tactics. Each individual action may not appear to trigger an international crisis. With each increase in pressure, we may judge that it still does not constitute war. But when a series of actions accumulate, it may create an entirely new status quo. Shipping routes may begin to be altered, while insurers and investors recalculate risks and frontline law enforcement personnel come under greater pressure. And the international community, through repeated judgments that each incident still falls short of a crisis, gradually becomes accustomed to things that should never have been regarded as normal in the first place. In the end, we may suddenly discover that no decisive war ever occurred on any particular day, yet the original status quo no longer exists.
This test launch was a routine military training activity conducted by the Chinese armed forces and was not directed at any specific country or target. We provided advance notification to the Solomon Islands and other nations in the South Pacific region, as well as to other relevant countries. The activity was in accordance with international law and international practice. I wish to emphasize that China is committed to a path of peaceful development and a nuclear strategy of self-defense, and consistently maintains its nuclear forces at the minimum level required for national security. There is no need for relevant countries to overinterpret this. Diaoyudao and its affiliated islands are China's inherent territory. The operations of Chinese scientific research vessels in the waters surrounding the islands fall within the scope of China's sovereign rights. They are legitimate, lawful, and beyond reproach. China firmly opposes Japan's interference with these legitimate operations and has lodged solemn representations with the Japanese side.
However, China's Pacific missile launch has put the United States and its allied nations on edge over Beijing's growing military ambitions. Analysts said the launch appeared to be aimed more at deterrence than at testing a new generation of missile technology. The test publicly showcased China's sea-based nuclear deterrent for the first time since a similar launch in 1982. Type 094 Jin-class submarine. Class, a nuclear-powered ballistic missile submarine, SSBN, built to provide China with a continuous sea-based nuclear strike capability. Displacement, estimated to displace around 11,000 tons while submerged, making it one of the largest vessels in the PLA Navy submarine fleet. Crew, operated by an estimated crew of 130 to 140 personnel, responsible for navigation, combat operations, and strategic missile systems. Strategic role, forms the backbone of China's sea-based nuclear deterrent, supporting Beijing's second strike capability as part of its expanding nuclear triad. Estimated range, more than 10,000 kilometers. giving the missile the reach to engage targets across intercontinental distances. Mission: designed to carry out long-range intercontinental nuclear strike missions as a key component of China's sea-based nuclear deterrent. Reach: reportedly capable of reaching the US mainland from launch positions in Chinese waters, reducing the need for submarines to sail into the open Pacific. Significance: represents China's newest generation of submarine-launched ballistic missiles, significantly strengthening the credibility and survivability of its sea-based nuclear deterrent. The launch marked another significant step in Beijing's effort to build a fully operational and survivable nuclear triad. Zhao Tong said, and I quote, "This missile test appears to have been intended more for strategic signaling than for technical experimentation or operational development. Although China has long been understood to possess this capability, this marks its first public demonstration." Unquote. The United States said it tracked the missile test and again raised concerns about China's expanding nuclear capabilities. Washington described China's rapid and opaque expansion of its nuclear forces as an issue of growing global concern. China's nuclear triad: land, intercontinental ballistic missiles capable of delivering long-range nuclear strikes against strategic targets across continents. Sea, ballistic missile submarines armed with JL-series submarine-launched ballistic missiles, providing a survivable sea-based nuclear deterrent. Nuclear-capable bombers equipped to carry air-launched ballistic missiles, adding flexibility to China's strategic strike options. Purpose: designed to ensure a credible second strike nuclear capability, allowing China to maintain deterrence even after potential first attack. Japan, Australia, and New Zealand also voiced concern after China's missile launch over the Pacific region. Beijing urged other countries not to overinterpret the test and defended its long-standing nuclear policy. Analysts said the launch could encourage US allies to increase defense spending and strengthen military coordination. Japanese analysts said the test would reinforce Tokyo's case for accelerating its military modernization plans. Experts said the launch underscored the broader trend of intensifying military competition across the Asia-Pacific region. A new report from China debunked the Philippines' territorial claims in the South China Sea, presenting a systematic rebuttal that sought to undercut Manila's legal and historical arguments while reframing the dispute in Beijing's favor. The China Institute for Marine Affairs released the report, Reuters reported on July 8, an announcement that was quickly circulated through government channels and picked up by regional media as part of a coordinated information push. The paper is titled Historical and Legal Critique of the Philippines' Territorial Claims, a name that signals its dual focus on archival evidence and juridical interpretation to challenge the basis of Manila's maritime assertions. The report reviewed how the Philippines' territorial boundaries were formed and later expanded, walking through colonial-era agreements, post-war arrangements, and subsequent diplomatic developments to argue that Manila's present claims exceed earlier precedents. The report said Manila tried to push territorial limits beyond earlier treaty borders, alleging that modern Filipino interpretations selectively reinterpret historical documents and legal instruments to justify broader maritime entitlements.
The report concludes that the Philippines attempt to break through the territorial limits defined by a series of treaties with legal force and to extend its territory to Huangyang Dao and certain maritime features of the Nansha Chundao lacks historical evidence, manifestly contravenes the rules of international law concerning the acquisition of territory, and is devoid of historical and legal foundation. The Philippines' territorial expansion attempts undermine the international legal system and pose a threat to regional peace and stability, as well as the post-war order arrangement. The full text of the report can be viewed and downloaded from the official media platforms of the Ministry of Natural Resources and the website of the China Institute for Marine Affairs.
The Philippines' claims over Huangyang Dao and Nansha features distort history, the paper argued, asserting that Manila's narrative selectively interprets events and documents to create a broader territorial picture that, in the author's view, does not withstand close archival scrutiny. Chinese researchers claim those historical sources have little legal probative value, arguing that many cited records are anecdotal, contextually ambiguous, or irrelevant to modern legal standards and therefore should not form the basis for expansive maritime entitlements. The report concludes expansion attempts contravene international rules on territory acquisition, maintaining that unilateral moves to extend sovereignty or maritime zones run counter to established treaty norms and customary principles governing territorial change. Beijing's position is that treaties with legal force set clear limits that Manila cannot exceed, and the paper repeatedly emphasizes binding agreements and historical boundary settlements as constraining frameworks that, in China's view, invalidate recent Philippine claims. The Chinese report seeks to undercut the Philippines' South China Sea legal narrative, aiming to shift the debate from military posturing to documentary and juridical contestation in hopes of weakening Manila's diplomatic leverage. This report from China gained significance in the wake of China's claims on Taiwan, because attempts to solidify maritime justifications dovetail with broader efforts to assert control over adjacent waters as cross-strait tensions rise. Remember, Beijing views Taiwan as part of China and lays claim to waters around the territory, a stance that frames regional maritime disputes within Beijing's larger sovereignty and reunification narrative. Speculation of an impending Taiwan invasion has increased since Trump's trip to China in May, with some observers linking heightened military and legal signaling to the diplomatic exchanges and strategic messaging surrounding that visit.